Welcome, mortals, to the Beautiful Dead podcast. If you've come to this channel, you should stay for several reasons. 1, you love vampires. This is a vampire podcast where we break down movies, TV shows, and books about vampires. We talk about the universe that's been created, how are they made, what rules do they have to follow, and more. Every once in a while, like October, I set aside the fiction and talk about all things vampire. 2, you have a podcast or would like to have a podcast and want to see behind the scenes of recording one. I edit out very little, so you will get to see mistakes and interruptions and learn along with me. Or 3, you're a fan of the podcast and you just want to watch me record it live. Or you like my books and you can't get enough of me. So, if you're still here, I promise it's due to your own free will, and I have not used my powers to keep you here. Now, watch the title cards and listen to the music along with the podcast. I'm gonna go get a bite, and I'll meet you back here, nice and full.
Hello? Really?
Vampire! We take your candy!
Count Dracula.
I am Dracula. And I bid you welcome, Mr. Hunt, to my house. Come in.
Our first award goes to the vampire for most blood drained in a single evening.
The strength of the vampire is that people will not believe in him.
Good evening, my fellow vampire lovers. The sun is going down, and you know what that means. It's time for me to record another episode of my podcast, The Beautiful Dead. As always, I'm your host, Lena Nazari, and you can find me by going to lenanazari.com. There's links to my social media. You can join my fanged family. You can click on the appearances tab to see where I'm going to be. And also there is a link to contact me. I haven't said this in a while, but yes, I am the person who responds to all of your messages. So if you have messaged me and I have not responded, it is probably lost somewhere. So please message me again, but I will get to you. Bear with me. This is a very busy time for me, as you can imagine, so give it a couple days for me to respond. I just finished my appearance at the Norwin Library supporting local authors. It was a great time. I love to be in my community, but beyond that, I got to meet someone very cool, and you are actually going to hear his music in this episode. It will be underneath me the whole time I'm talking, so if you're digging the sound, his name is Chris Miskus, and I will put links in the description of the podcast and the video on YouTube to his album that you will be hearing today. And he also wrote a book, so the music you're hearing today is actually a soundtrack that he wrote to go along with his book, so go check that out. Speaking of supporting people, at the end, I'm also going to play another song from my friend Stavros, who's also my fangsmith. And you can see the link in the descriptions for all of his stuff. But while I'm talking about Stavros, this week's Vampire Tea, perfect for October, and our Vampire Iceberg, we're doing Wolf's Bane blend. This is my favorite one. So I thought I'd go back to one of my favorites. It's very comforting. I like it. I have it in my True Blood mug here. So this is what I'll be sipping on, as well as some water, because we have a lot to talk about. So since we have a lot to talk about, I'm actually not going to do the tarot card pull, even though it is the 1st of October. I'm going to do it off mic, so follow me on social media to see what my tarot is for October, but we just don't have time to do all that right now. When this episode drops, I'll be in Washington, D.C. at Creation DC, hanging out with my favorite fandom, which is the Supernatural fandom. If you miss me, don't worry. I'm going to be at Creation Nashville in December. And if Supernatural's not your thing, that's fine. But you love horror, I will be at the Haunted Hills Hayride October 14th in North Versailles, Pennsylvania. And I will be at Monster Mania in November. That's in Oaks, Pennsylvania. So come check it out if you love all things horror. Speaking of which, happy October. I am very excited. I know I've been talking about this for a long time. I've been doing a lot of research to prepare for all of these episodes. This will be pretty much the whole month of October trying to get through this, but I'm very excited to do it, and that is the Vampire Iceberg. On YouTube, you will see that there's a clear edit. And that is because I wanted to pause for a second because I want to make sure that I credit the person who created this Vampire Iceberg. I found this. All right, let's turn off all these alerts. My fault for not doing that. Sorry, YouTube, but that's what this channel's about, right? Because it's all about seeing what happens behind the scenes. So I just turned off all the alerts on my computer. Let's go back. Podcast listeners, I just had to stop for a second because I want to make sure I give credit to the person who created this Vampire Iceberg, and I'm currently showing the entire iceberg on YouTube, and then I will show it layer by layer. If you are just listening to the podcast, you'll have to go find it yourself. It's on Reddit, but this user posted this iceberg 7 months ago, and the user's name is Big Moi, M-O-I. So Big Moi, if you ever watch this, reach out to me. Thank you. I used your iceberg and I'm very excited to break this down. But because we have so much to talk about, I'm going to have a sip of water before we even get started. I just want to jump right into it, okay? It is spooky season. The pumpkin spice lattes are flowing, the leaves are changing colors, the nights are getting longer, and what better way to celebrate this than by doing a Vampire Iceberg? Truthfully, I don't know how many weeks this is going to take. I'm thinking it's going to be the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of October because the last week of October, of course, is the first hour of the Bite Shift audio. So I'm going to try and shove all of this into 4 episodes. But I think it's the perfect way to welcome autumn, to kill some time until Halloween. This iceberg, like I said, was found on Reddit, created by the user Big Moi, posted in March of 2023. Big shout out to this user. I looked at a lot of options, but this one felt like the juiciest, and it had a lot of material to talk about, so that is the one I picked. A quick perusal of this tells me, I'm pretty sure, that we are going from the most known to the least known when it comes to vampire topics. So the top layer, we're going to see a lot of fiction, vampire art and things like that. But as we get lower, we are going to get into the real stuff, which is the legends, the sightings, the suspicions, the killers, and things like that. I want to be abundantly clear. This is my own interpretation of this iceberg. I did not talk to the user before I did this. I did not talk to the person who created it. So if you don't agree, do your own video. I'm happy to watch it, but this is mine. Okay? Be prepared to hear the phrase, I did an episode on this, because a good chunk of this iceberg we have already talked about. So if you have never listened to the podcast or been on this channel, there's a lot of things I've already talked about. And if I talk about something and I only touch on it and you want to hear more, go find the episode. For fun, we're going to have a counter of how many times I say I did an episode on this. And also, as I'm writing the script for this and doing all the research, I decided we need a second counter. We need to count how many times I say the word Dracula. So we will have a Dracula counter. Without further ado, let's hit this iceberg. Too soon? Is it too soon? All right. If you're offended, this is not the channel for you. Layer 1, just the tip. Just the tip. Right out of the gate. Dracula. the most well-known vampire. I've done several episodes on Dracula. The novel, of course, was written by an Irish author, Bram Stoker. It came out in 1897, much to the shock of Victorian society. Some actually called it grotesque. Yes, that word was used. But it wasn't the blood or the frightening content that upset the 19th century Victorian society. No, it was the fact that 4 out of 5 of the vampires were female. What? Women? Misbehaving? No, we can't have it. Not only were they misbehaving, but they were sexually aggressive. They went after what they wanted. And the men were not happy with that. They were shocked. The novel would be turned into a play and then now a very famous film by Universal Studios with Bela Lugosi. I did an episode on Bela, so you can go listen to that. Since that time, Dracula would go on to be the most portrayed fictional character of all time. In August of 2015, so I haven't had a chance to look at new numbers, the count went down in the Guinness Book of World Records with a staggering 538 films having the famous vampire in it. This, of course, was before Nicolas Cage would don the cape in Renfield, or the most recent retelling of Dracula, which is The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which I have yet to do an episode on, but the script is written. It's actually right here, right below this camera, so I will be doing that soon. I can only assume that if you've been on this earth for longer than 3 years, you have heard about Dracula. If not, message me and we will have a very long talk. Next, Castlevania. Castlevania is a horror action video game developed by Konami and released in 1986. How is that possible? I remember when it came out. It was on Nintendo. You played as Simon Belmont, a descendant of the Belmont clan, a family of vampire hunters. Your job is to make it to the famous Count Dracula to slay him. This game would be hugely successful. I actually remember watching my brothers play it. They wouldn't let me play it. Andrew and Aaron, if you are watching, I take apologies in the form of gift cards. Anywho, there has been more games, and as of 2014, it's a total of 29 games in the Castlevania franchise. In 2017, the Castlevania TV series would launch on Netflix and run for 4 seasons until 2021. The show was an animated dark fantasy series geared towards adults. The first 2 seasons were based on the 3rd video game, Dracula's Curse, with elements of the Curse of Darkness and Symphony of the Night. Many recognizable actors were in Castlevania, and yes, it is on my list of things to cover. So if you're yelling right now saying, why haven't you covered it? I'll get to it, okay? I don't know if you know this, but the list of vampire movies, TV shows, and books is very long. This podcast will be on for a very long time. All right, next, Hellsing. Hellsing is a Japanese manga series that ran from May 1997 to September 2008. It is about the Hellsing organization, which is a secret society that fights supernatural creatures, including, but not limited to, vampires. The organization was originally the Royal Order of Protestant Knights and was led by none other than Abraham Van Helsing, the infamous vampire hunter from Dracula. Leadership is passed down through the Van Helsing line, and it would be licensed for the English language and released here by Dark Horse Comics. A 13-episode anime version would be released in October of 2001, and in March 2021, it was announced that Amazon Studios is developing a live-action film based on Hellsing. So good job to the creators. Good for you. Underworld. Underworld is a movie released in 2003. It's essentially about a war between vampires and werewolves. Anybody who's listened to the podcast or watched the YouTube channel knows that I love this trope. I love the trope of the vampire versus werewolf. It is about, it's set right here in present day, and the vampires have this group of warriors that are like specially trained to fight the werewolves. One of them is Selena, who's played by Kate Beckinsale. She defies orders, sets off on a series of events that puts a human named Michael in the middle of this centuries-old battle. The franchise would ultimately create 5 movies and 1 short film. It didn't impress critics, but Underworld has an extremely loyal fan base. It has been financially successful. Selena is one of the most recognizable vampires around, and yes, this is also on my list of things to cover. Blade. I did an episode on the Blade films, but if you want more, Blade is a character who was originally created in 1973 for Marvel Comics as a supporting character in The Tomb of Dracula. The backstory is that Blade's mother was bitten by a vampire while she was in labor, making him immune to vampirism, but also adapting a bit of the vampire's abilities. In 1998, the movie would come out with Mr. Wesley Snipes as Blade. In this version, the attack on his mother transferred the vampire virus to him, transforming him, making him half vampire, half human, which we know is called a dhampir. After the film came out, the comic book character was retroactively changed to a dhampir in the comic books to match the film. 2 sequels would make it to the public, with the final villain in the 3rd one being Dracula. A little-known TV series aired on Spike in 2006, set after the events of Blade Trinity, but lasted only 1 season for a total of 13 episodes. The reboot is in the works inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It has gone through a series of issues and problems. I believe there was a director change, but last I heard, it is due out September 2024. Fright Night. I have done an episode on this one. The original Fright Night came out in 1985, and it tells the story of Charlie Brewster, an all-American high school teen obsessed with this local horror TV show, who suspects that his new neighbor, Jerry Dandridge, is a vampire. When no one believes him, he tracks down the host of this local horror TV show, Peter Vincent, who plays a vampire hunter on TV, but of course is nothing but an actor. It has gone down as a classic. Many, many horror fans and vampire fans know this movie. Of course, there was a remake that came out. Chris Sarandon plays the vampire. His character is still quite often ranked as one of the top 10 vampires of all time. He's hit a bunch of sexy vampire lists. A sequel was made, and then of course, like I said, in 2011 they did a remake with Colin Farrell as the vampire neighbor. A sequel to that version would be direct-to-video in 2013, set in Romania, with Miss Elizabeth Bathory as the villain. Supernatural. Yay! Not only have I done an episode on this one, but I did a second one because I wasn't happy with the first one. Supernatural is a TV show that ran 15 seasons from 2005 to 2020, aka the year we don't talk about. The show tells the story of the Winchester brothers, Sam and Dean, who were raised as hunters. No, not those kind of hunters. They are supernatural hunters. They hunt down supernatural creatures. All kinds of creatures. Not limited to, but not definitely including vampires. In this universe, vampires can be in the sun. They mate for life. Dead man's blood is a poison to them. They need to be beheaded or shot by the cult to die. The British men of letters have anti-vamp devices that also will work on these vampires. In this world, the vampires are all descendant from an alpha vampire who was created by Eve as the first vampire. Ingesting their blood will turn you, but there is a cure if you drink the cure before you drink human blood. Most of the vampires in the show are bad, but not all of them. If you're only going to watch one vampire episode of Supernatural, listen to Lena. Listen to Lena. Season 6, Episode 5. Watch Live Free or Twi Hard. There are so many vampire jokes in this episode that will make you laugh so hard. Side note, plug your ears if you have not watched the show. Ready? Spoiler alert. It is a vampire that finally takes down Dean at the end. So after 15 years, it is a vampire that kills Dean Winchester. So bragging rights to the vampires. All right, moving on. I could talk about this all day, so let's just move on. I Am Legend. Well, I'm sure many of you know the Will Smith movie. It was a book first, written in 1954. So talk about like being ahead of the times. This book is set in the future year of 1976 in Los Angeles after a war that has destroyed everything. Dust storms are weekly. There was this massive pandemic that killed most humans, with the infected survivors having turned into vampires. It follows the story of a lone survivor, Robert Neville, who hides from vampires at night and then drives around during the day to stake them and look for supplies. And meanwhile, he's like trying to understand the virus. I won't say much more because I will cover this in an episode in the future, but I will say that if you haven't, read the book. And I know there's a lot of you who aren't readers, so listen to the book. Just ingest the book in some way. So it's such a good book. All right, moving on. Count Von Count, the lovable puppet on Sesame Street that taught many of us how to count. His look obviously is an homage to Bela Lugosi's version of Dracula. The character is based on a very old legend that if you throw down seeds or rice or anything like that, that the vampire has to stop to count it. And actually they just used that joke in this season of What We Do in the Shadows, and it made me laugh so hard. But the whole thing is like if you throw down the rice, the vampire has to stop to count it, and that gives you time to get away. Or he'll be so distracted, or he or she will be so distracted that they will burn in the sun. He showed up on Sesame Street in season 4 in 1972, counting blocks with Bert and Ernie. He lives in a castle with bats, a wolf, and a cat. And when he is done counting, thunder and lightning appears, and he says, ah, 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 ah. He has several girlfriends. All of them are countesses, so good for him. And he does have relatives, like his uncle Uno. Yay! All right, True Blood. What a segue from Sesame Street to True Blood. I have done an episode on this show. It's one of the episodes I would actually like to redo, so watch for that in the future. True Blood is a TV show from HBO that came out in September 2008. I can't believe it was that long ago. And it ran until August 2014. It's based on the Sookie Stackhouse novels by Charlaine Harris. It's set in Bonton, Louisiana, in a world where the vampires are out of the coffin. They have come out. Everybody knows about them. The synthetic blood, called True Blood, has been created, so they can now mainstream and they can drink this synthetic blood and sort of be a part of society. However, because of this, they face judgment and persecution. They kind of have their own laws. They're fighting for rights. The show uses vampires to make statements about the way that society treats people who are differently. There's other supernatural creatures in this world that have to deal with different things, and they have to fight for things like the right to be married, the right to own property, the right to vote, things like that. There's maenads, werewolves, shifters, fairies, witches, and many, many more. This show brought us Vampire Bill, Eric Northman, Jess, Pam, vampire businesses, vampire kings and queens, vampire councils and politicians, and even an anti-vampire church. The whole show, if you have not seen it, is so well done. And people might not know this, but I was actually watching True Blood when the idea for my book sparked. So if you're ever interested in that, go back and listen to the episode I did on my books. Vampire Diaries. This is another one that I've done an episode on, but would like to eventually redo. Vampire Diaries is a show from the CW that ran from 2009 to 2017. Also based on books by the same name. It is set in Mystic Falls, Virginia. And this town has this like long history of supernatural events, but very specifically has a long history of dealing with vampires. The founding families have a council that on the outside looks like it's all about like debutante balls and fairs and parties, but honestly, the point of the council is to keep their eyes open for vampires returning to the town. The Salvatore brothers, Damon and Stefan, are two of these vampires. Having been turned around the Civil War when the town took it upon themselves to wrangle up all the vampires and have them destroyed, the brothers have now returned to present day to get to know Lena, who is a girl that is the spitting image of Catherine, who is the vampire that turned them. Over the series, we see love, we see hate, we see loyalty, we see betrayal, vampires, werewolves, witches, hunters, and plenty of steamy drama. One thing that is very original, see what I did there? Do you see what I did there? One of the things about the stories that's very original is that they show the origin of vampires. They take the lines all the way back to one family who was inadvertently turned into vampires by their mother, who was a witch. She was doing a spell to try and protect her family, but inadvertently turned them into vampires in a time where people believed that demons brought on menstruation. So long time ago. The original vampires would create their own line of vamps. So each line of vamps traces back to one of the siblings. And in this world, if an original dies, the whole line dies. So I just thought that was so interesting. Now I will tell you, to kill a Michelson, which is very, very hard, will kill a lot of people. So it's an interesting way to do it. And I really applaud them for that creativity. And then the show, of course, spurned two spin-offs, the originals and legacies. Van Helsing. This is possibly referring to the character from the book Dracula, but considering what else is on the layer, this particular top layer, I'm assuming that it's talking about the movie Van Helsing, which I have done an episode on. So in this movie, which came out in 2004, and it's billed as an action horror. So if you're somebody who loves vampires, but maybe your partner doesn't, this is a fun one that you can watch. It has vampires, but it's not necessarily all about vampires, and it's not straight horror or straight sex. It's more of like an action. Hugh Jackman plays the famous vampire hunter, Miss Kate Beckinsale, the one and only. She plays not a vampire this time, but a Romany hunter, Anna, who's the last of a family who has sworn to destroy Dracula. Van Helsing is sent by the church to Transylvania, not only to protect Anna because she's the last of the line, but to kill Dracula. In this world, we see werewolves, we see Frankenstein's monster, we see Jekyll and Hyde, we see the very famous vampire brides. If you haven't seen this movie, watch it. If you haven't seen it in a long time, rewatch it. This is one of those movies that is in my rotation that I do throw on a lot. 30 Days of Night. I've done an episode on this one. 30 Days of Night was written by a man named Steve Niles, who conceived of this story in form of comic, but after meeting a lack of interest in a lot of pitches, he decided to then pitch it as a film. When this didn't work, Niles shelved the idea until he showed it to IDW Publishing, who published the comic, and then a man named Ben Templesworth provided the artwork. And when Niles and his agent shopped the comic around again as a potential film adaptation, Niles found that all of a sudden, people were into the idea. So I don't know what changed. Sam Raimi initially picked it up. The property rights. So the movie came out in 2007. The novel was created incidentally to coincide, not incidentally, on purpose, to coincide with the movie's release. The story is such an interesting concept. Like, this is not one of my favorite films of all time, but I do think it's so interesting, and bravo to him for even thinking about it. So essentially the story is that there's this Alaskan town that has a very small population, and for 1 month a year, the sun sets and it does not rise. So for 30 days, you are in night in this tiny Alaskan town. So most of the residents leave for this month. They go somewhere else. So there's a very small amount of people who stay in this town and just ride out the 30 days of night. Well, in this particular town, and in this particular time, vampires descend on the town and have free reign for 30 days because there's no sunlight to stop them. And they just start ripping through these residents. In this film, the vampires are very animalistic. They don't even speak. They just like do clicking sounds to each other. They have mouths full of very, very sharp teeth. They screech. This is one of those movies that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And the guy who plays the lead vampire, and for the life of me, I can't think of his name. Danny something. He was from American Horror Story. He's so good. Anywho, it's one of those ones that was so very well done. I saw it in theaters and it stuck with me. So it's one of the very first things that I did an episode on because it's one of the ones that stuck with me. Next, What We Do in the Shadows. This is a movie and a TV show. If you are not familiar with this, where have you been? Where have you been? Anywho, the most recent episode just dropped July 13th, 2023. I have done an episode on this. If you somehow have not heard of this, What We Do in the Shadows is a mockumentary that was created by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi. It came out in 2014, which I can't believe it's almost 10 years old. The film crew follows the escapades of these 3 vampire flatmates as they go through their lives. They follow all of the things like doing chores, needing to be invited into nightclubs, ongoing battles with the local werewolves, trying to get dressed without having a reflection in mirrors. It is such a good movie, you guys. It is genius, okay? So then there's a TV show on FX that aired March of 2019 that's still running and is just as good. I don't even want to say it's better, but like it is just as good. Trust me. You need to watch the movie and the TV show. It's set in the same universe as the movie, and we even get to see cameos of the vampires from the movie who show up. It's set in Staten Island, and the group of vampires Laszlo, Nadia, Colin Robinson, and Nandor, and then Nandor's familiar Guillermo are all part of this. They're the main focus, but there's so many interesting characters that you meet along the way, and so many side characters. Just trust me. For vampire nerds, there are so many jokes about vampire legends and lores and like inside jokes about vampire stereotypes. You will, I have probably watched it 4 times because I watched the first season, then the second season came out, so I went back and rewatched the first season and then the second season and so on and so forth. So I just keep rewatching it. I put it on when maybe I'm having like a day where I'm feeling kind of depressed. I'll put it on. Do yourself a favor. That's all I need to talk about. Count Chocula is a breakfast cereal that belongs to a line of monster cereals created by General Mills. Count Chocula, Frankenberry, Boo Berry, Fruit Brute, which I actually forgot about until I did the research, and Yummy Mummy make up the entire line, with a 6th one, Carmella Creeper, being introduced in 2023. The cereals are produced each year from September 1st until October 31st. Count Chocula and Frankenberry were the first 2 to be created in 1971, making this fall the 52nd year of these cereals. This Halloween season, we get to enjoy the newest cereal, Carmella Creeper, the first female monster in the cereal line, and a zombie. And then, you know what? Comment down below what your favorite monster cereal is. I'm interested because this is like an ongoing argument every year with myself and my friends of like, what is the best monster cereal? Anywho, side note, let's get back. So this year we get to have something called Monster Mash, which is all of the cereals in one box. And I have it upstairs. I love it. Last year for my birthday, we had a vampire murder mystery dinner theater party. And one of the prizes was a box of Count Chocula. That's how much I love it. I get so excited every year when I see it out. Halloween Oreos and Monster cereal. The second it hits the grocery store, I get ridiculously excited. Morbius. Unfortunately, I have done an episode on this one. Not only have I done an episode, but I spent $20 to buy this movie and I'm still mad about it. Morbius is a 2022 movie that was based in the MCU on a Marvel character of the same name, Dr. Michael Morbius, who suffers from this rare blood disease since birth, and to try and cure himself, he infects himself with a form of vampirism. The movie was not well received by audiences or critics. There's talks of Morbius showing up in future Spider-Man. Don't yell at me, okay? Spider-Man movies, or possibly in the upcoming Blade. The comics call him Morbius the Living Vampire. He first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 101 in October 1971. I am so sorry to that person who created him for what 2023 did. Moving on, Dio. I'm pretty sure this refers to the manga character, not the rock band. So Dio Brando is a character in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He first appears as a young, angry son of an alcoholic, but thanks to a stone mask, is turned into a vampire. Doing some research, I found that the character was inspired by serial killers and the psychological manipulation that they use to control their victims, and also their ability to just do horrible things while thinking that they're doing the right thing. Furthermore, the physical look of Dio is inspired by Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner, which I thought was just a really interesting thing to note. Nosferatu, just in case you've somehow never heard of this. Nosferatu was a German silent film made in 1922, so it's 100 years old. While the names were changed, like the Count's name is Orlok, it was pretty obvious that the movie was a clear ripoff of Dracula. Stoker's heirs would successfully sue, and it was ordered that the film be destroyed, but as we all know, copies did survive, as it's now celebrating 100 years. There's rumors surrounding the making of this movie, specifically that the actor who played Count Orlok was actually a vampire, and that's why he was so good at it. My opinion, they created those rumors to get people to go watch the movie. I mean, studios have been doing stuff like this since the dawn of time, so I don't think that was real. Twilight. Yes. I have done an episode on this, on the entire Twilight saga. All right, let's get through this. Twilight is a series written by Stephanie Myers and released in 2005, with each of its additional 3 installments being released annually until 2008. The movie was released in 2008, with New Moon coming out in 2009, Eclipse in 2010, and then Breaking Dawn was split into 2 films, coming out in 2011 and 2012. The story centers around Miss Bella Swan, who moves from Phoenix, Arizona to Forks, Washington to live with her dad. She meets her classmate, Edward Cullen, who turns out to be a 104-year-old vampire. The books and movies were so popular, and recently teens are now, what's the word I'm looking for? They are finding it, and now it's like made this big re-emergence. They are falling in love with Bella and Jacob and Edward and everyone else in Forks. The books have sold 160 million copies, and it has been translated into 37 languages. If you've ever heard of vampires who sparkle and wonder where that came from, it's this. It came from this. So, I think we all know how I feel about Twilight, but Stephanie Meyers, good for you. I'm happy for you. You created a whole universe and you're successful, and I'm so happy for you. Moving on. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yes, I have done an episode on both the movie and the TV show. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a comedy written by Joss Whedon. The movie came out in 1992. Features Buffy, a blonde teen cheerleader in LA who only cares about her jock boyfriend and her friends and being cool until she finds out that she's a born slayer. That in every generation, a girl rises as the slayer and has superpowers to fight vampires. The movie was not what Joss had pictured or wanted. It's rumored that he was so frustrated with the direction of the movie that he just left the set and refused to come back. So his answer to this was the TV show that came out in 1997 on the WB. It would be 7 seasons. It would have Sarah Michelle Gellar as the titular Buffy. We would also get to meet Angel, a vampire who's introduced to us very, very early and becomes her first love. Then we would also get to meet Spike, who would fall in love with Buffy. She would sort of fight that love, and eventually she would reciprocate. He comes into the show very early on actually as a villain and an enemy of Angel and Buffy. Used to run around with Angel, but now is not a fan of his. To this day, many women say that their love of bad boys partially is to blame on Spike. An interesting twist on the lore in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In this universe, vampires are demons. So they are humans who, through the transformation of becoming vampires, are essentially possessed by demons, and that you lose your soul. But in this universe, there's actually a way for vampires to sort of regain their soul and shove the demon out, I guess, or the demon is like overpowered. Speaking of vampires, who are the reason that women are attracted to bad boys today, let's talk about the Lost Boys, which, yes, I have done an episode on. It brought us David, Michael, Star, the Frog Brothers, so many memorable characters, so many memorable lines. It is set in 1987 is when it came out, and when it is set, and it is set in Santa Monica, but they call it something else, Santa Clara, I think. And it's two brothers, Michael and Sam, who move with their mother to their grandpa's house after a divorce. Soon Michael meets Star at the pier at a carnival and is pulled into this gang of boys led by David. While hanging out with them, David gives Michael a bottle of wine that of course turns out to be his blood. Star warns him, don't drink it, but he does it anyway and starts the transformation from human to vampire. You then find out that David and all of his gang are vampires. To stop the transformation and not become full vamp, Michael has to not feed from humans and then kill the originator of the line. This is how he completes the transformation. We then find out that Star and the little boy, who's also half turned, were not full vampires, so that when the head vampire dies, they revert to human. We also meet the Frog Brothers, who are two brothers who work in a comic shop and know how to hunt vampires. It sounds like most of their information comes from comic books, but whatever, it works. That's the important thing. The soundtrack to this is absolutely amazing. The acting is still good today, and there is so many memorable lines from this movie. All right, one more. Interview with the Vampire. This book was written by Anne Rice in 1976. We just talked about this on the last episode. She wrote the Vampire Chronicles. This was the first book of the Vampire Chronicles. It tells us the story of Louis de Pontefract and his transition from human to vampire and everything that happens after that. His maker Lestat. And then, of course, they make a child vampire, Claudia. They are our main characters. But then we have some side characters like Armand and Madeleine and the Theatre de Vampire. Considering that this was her first book, it was a banger. Like, imagine that's your first book ever. Interview with the Vampire. Anywho. This brought us our first same-sex vampire couple, also same-sex parent relationship, and since then we have the movie, we have the AMC TV show, which we did cover on the podcast as it was coming out, and I will be covering again when the second season comes out. I don't know about you, but I am so excited for the second season. And that's it. We did it. We did Layer 1. Are you still with me? Are you with me? Because we are going to do it. Take a deep, deep breath because we're going to head into Layer 2. Almost under. From Dusk Till Dawn. Yes, I did an episode on this. This is one of the early episodes for my podcast. It is a Quentin Tarantino film that came out in 1996, starring George Clooney, Quentin Tarantino, Harvey Keitel, Juliette Lewis, and Miss Salma Hayek as Santanico Pandemonium. It is about two convicts who are on the run and kidnap a family to get across the Mexican border. They stop at a biker bar, and unfortunately, the bar is staffed by vampires. This was such a new take on vampires. It's still regarded as one of a must-see for vampire fans. It did have direct-to-video sequels, and it had From Dusk Till Dawn TV show, which premiered in March of 2014 and ran for 3 seasons. Bear with me, I need a sip of water. Ooh. Salem's Lot. Let me just say it quickly. I did an episode on this one. Salem's Lot was written by Stephen King and published in 1975. It tells the story of a writer named Ben Mears who returns to the place that he lived from ages 5 to 9. It's called Jerusalem's Lot. It's in Maine, and they just call it Salem's Lot. Much to his dismay, his arrival coincides with this mysterious Kurt Barlow, who is, let's say it together, a vampire. He proceeds to feed on or turn the residents of this sleepy Maine town. The first film version came out in 1979. It was a 2-part miniseries released on CBS. In 1987, a movie called Return to Salem's Lot was the sequel to the miniseries. In 1995, it was a radio drama on the BBC. And in 2004, TNT premiered a new adaptation with Rob Lowe as our hero, Ben. Filming began on a new version of September 2021, and it was supposed to come out September 2022. So for those of you counting, it was supposed to be out a year ago. I don't know what happened. All I know is the last thing that was said was that it was ready to go, but there's no release date. And if you go on IMDb, it just says like post-production. New Line Cinema, what are you doing? Where is it? Or at least tell us when we can expect it. What the heck is going on? Anywho, Stephen King has gone on to say that this is his favorite book that he's ever written. Steve, same. It's also my favorite book that you've ever written. Playboi Carti. He is an American musician, and he has a dream. He wants to be a vampire rock star. I covered him on the Music of the Vampires episode. He told reporters that the love for the undead comes from his appreciation for movies like The Lost Boys and Interview with the Vampire. He feels connected to the lifestyle, connected to the fashion. Playboy, same. Let's hang out. Anywho, at the end of one interview, Playboy told the interviewer, "When you write that shit, You tell them I'm a vampire. I'm going to start saying that. Anytime I do an interview, I'm going to end it with, when you write that shit, you tell them I'm a vampire. Anywho, when you're an artist and a creator who loves the undead and you use your talents to honor them, like moi, some people are into it, some people aren't. But he does it with songs like Vamp Anthem. He has this sort of like underlying organ underneath it. It's like synth melodies. It's exactly what you would expect when the beautiful dead are your inspiration. See what I did there? I named the podcast in my... Anywho. Vampire the Masquerade is a tabletop role-playing game that was released in 1991. In the game, the player assumes a role of a vampire or kindred, as they call them. There are different types of clans. There's the Bruja, the Toreador, the Gangrel, the Ventru, and the Nosferatu. Each have different like magic and powers, weaknesses and strengths, and different appearances. You have to traverse and survive this complicated world. The word masquerade is used in this world to address sort of the dance that you have to do to keep vampires secret from the humans. So they call anything that you're doing to protect the secret, they call it the masquerade. In 1996, a TV show produced by Aaron Spelling would air on Fox and be based on the game. It was called Kindred the Embrace, and yes, I have done an episode on that. Since its release, there's been 5 editions of the manual. Yes, I had the book when it came out. I would give anything to get a copy of that original Kindred tabletop Vampire the Masquerade role-playing book. And if anyone wants to know, yes, I did play it. I was the queen, I'm just saying. And if anybody would like to get that book for me and play with me, let me know, because I will work it into my schedule. Varney the Vampire is a gothic horror that first appeared in 1845 as a small part of a whole story, and they were these little tiny pamphlets called Penny Dreadfuls. The serials were released weekly from 1845 to 1847. Ultimately, it would be 667,000 words. Nice. It is about Sir Francis Varney. He's the vampire in the story, and the first time that vampires were mentioned in print as having sharpened canines that are used to puncture the neck and drink blood. Interesting tidbits. In an episode of Penny Dreadful, which, yes, is on my list, Van Helsing gives a copy of Varney the Vampire to Frankenstein to entertain him. In 2021, Varney is a character in one episode of season 4 of Castlevania, so the legacy lives on to this day. The Vampire Chronicles. I already touched on this in Layer 1. This is what all of Anne Rice's vampire novels collectively are called. There's 10 of them. There's Interview was the first, then Lestat, the Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, Tale of the Body Thief, Memnoch the Devil, Vampire Armand, Merrick, Blood and Gold, Blackwood Farm, Blood Canticle, Prince Lestat, and then Prince Lestat and the Realms of Atlantis, and then the last one is Blood Communion. And sadly, Anne Rice is no longer with us, so we will never get another book in the series. Blackula. Blackula was released in 1972. It was a horror film that was part of what is now called blaxploitation films. Blackula tells the story of an African prince who is turned into a vampire by Dracula. It opened to mixed reviews, but would end up being a box office success, and then would be followed by Scream, Blackula Scream, and in 2021 it was announced that they were going to do a remake. So I don't know if that's still in the works or not. Night Flyer. This is one that I covered on this channel in May. It is based on a short story by Mr. Stephen King and tells the story of a tabloid reporter who's hot on the trail of a serial killer who uses a small plane to hop from small airport to small airport and find victims. It's discovered that he's not just a killer, but, say it with me, a vampire. It came out in 1997, first on HBO, and then as a theatrical release the following year. A sequel was planned that I would have watched, but the movie never made it out because the first one performed so poorly they just scrapped the sequel. And if I could ever get my claws on that script, I have it up. I have it on DVD if you want to borrow it. Good luck finding it. Just saying. Dark Shadows. This horror soap opera aired on ABC from 1966 to 1971. By 1969, it was ABC's highest rated daytime drama. That is something. It was syndicated and rebroadcast on the Sci-Fi Channel. Anyone growing up in the 80s and 90s definitely saw an episode of this, especially if you had to stay home from school sick. Am I the only one? Every time I see Dark Shadows, I think of being home sick from school on the couch and it was on. It tells the story of the governess Victoria Winters, who arrives at Collinsport from New York. She's hired under mysterious circumstances, starting the position with the Collins family in their estate Collinwood, with many types of different supernatural creatures, not just vampires. The show aired, holy cow, 1,225 episodes total. Wow, I thought Supernatural was on a long time. It is about Barnabas Collins, the most famous vampire. He is 200 years old when he's introduced. And then there would be novels and several film versions of this, with the most latest being in 2012 with Mr. Johnny Depp as the vampire. Vampire. So this could be referencing the 1932 German film with a young man named Alan who studies occult matters, which leads him to cross paths with a vampire. Or it could be the RPG game that was released for PlayStation 4, Windows, and Xbox One in 2018. That one's about Dr. Jonathan Reed, who is turned into a vampire and fights his thirst because he wants to continue to try to do no harm. It could be either, it could be neither. There's another one called Vampire. So I'm moving on. The Hunger. This is a good one. And this is known by any well-respected vampire fan. And yes, I did an episode on this one as well. I really need to redo it. I really need to go back and redo it. It was one of my very early ones, and I don't think I did it justice. The movie came out in 1983. It is billed as an erotic horror film. It has Catherine Deneuve, David Bowie, and Susan Sarandon. It is a cult classic. It has a strong cult following. Not only that, but it would introduce us to Bela Lugosi's Dead. What a freaking amazing song. In that opening sequence of the vampires in the club looking for their next victim, it really plays on our fears of aging. It is one of the first vampire films to really tap into the bisexuality of vampires. In 2021, Warner Brothers verified that a script was in the works to remake this film. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it could be amazing, but also, like, how do you remake them? All right, I'm stressing myself out. I have to move on. Daybreakers. This is a movie from 2009. It's really more of a science fiction than a horror, and yes, it is on my list of things to cover. In the future, it's a world where vampires have taken over, and a powerful corporation, no, not that powerful corporation, a different one, is a vampire-run corporation that's working on making synthetic blood. Where did we hear that? But meanwhile, it captives and farms humans for their blood. This one is like a real cool idea for vampire-friendly world domination. Like if you're gonna be the vampire that takes over the world, watch this movie, because they have like underground tunnels, they have UV blocking cars. Like, it's very interesting how they redo the world to suit them and their needs. Lots of familiar faces in this one. Pretty solid reviews and ratings. I promise someday I am going to do this. I think, in my opinion, it's like a very realistic idea of how I mean, vampires could someday take over. Thirst. Yes, I have done an episode on this one. And it came to my attention because of a bunch of those like vampire movies to must watch, that you must watch lists. So I found it on DVD, I watched it. I agree, it is one of those ones that you really have to watch. It's a Korean film. It came out in 2009. It tells the story of a priest who is infected with vampirism through a tainted blood transfusion. So I thought that was really interesting. He attempts to hold on to his mortality while fighting the feeding and the sexual lust. We've seen that idea before. It won the jury prize at the 2009 Cannes Festival. It also is the first Korean feature to be made with both Korean and US funding and distribution. So congrats to you guys. Like, ooh, to do it as a vampire film too. Like, some of those stuffy people, they only want like hoity-toity dramas. So to have a vampire movie have that much support, bravo. Near Dark. Let's say it together. I did an episode on this one. It is another one that is on all of the must-watch lists. If you're any self-respecting vampire film fan, I know you've seen this one. It is a Western horror. That is how it's billed, Western horror, that came out in 1987 with a number of recognizable actors. It tells the story of Caleb, a young, cute, good-looking old Oklahoma boy who goes out one night and meets the beautiful May. And of course, you know, how many times have we been taught this lesson? Someone beautiful and seductive paying attention to you at a bar at night, and then you leaving with them usually does not turn out well. So she introduces him to a band of vampires, and then she bites him, and now he's turning, and he's all mixed up with this bad group in this RV. They're running from the sun, they're running from the law. They go and slaughter a bar full of people. Bill Paxton as a vampire with a half-burned face is probably one of the most famous images of vampire films, and it's used a lot on a lot of posters. Since its release, it's amassed a respectable cult following, and many horror filmmakers today... I need water. My mouth is getting dry. It's a lot of talking, y'all. Many filmmakers today, many writers today, especially in the horror genre, will cite this as their favorite movie, their inspiration. I think there was even a story about Joss Whedon talking to Luke Perry about making Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and he said, "Have you ever seen Near Dark?" And Luke Perry was like, "Who do you think you're talking to? Of course I've seen it." Let the right one in. So there is a Swedish and American version of this one, and yes, I've done an episode on this one. This is another one that's at the top of a lot of best vampire movies of all time lists. It's based on a novel released in 2004 and tells the story of Oscar, who is 12 years old. He's being bullied at school. He has a single mom at home who's not around a lot. And this man moves in next door to his apartment with a little girl named, I think it's Ellie. I don't know if it's Ellie or Eli because of the Swedish translation, but we're going to go with Ellie. Eli, who appears to be his age. Quickly we find out that Eli is a vampire, and the man with this character is their like human servant, I guess. And then when the human servant dies while trying to collect blood for the vampire, Oscar sort of like takes over and then leaves with the vampire and becomes the vampire's new human servant. I like really boiled this down to the most simple description because this is one of those movies I really don't want to ruin for you. So if you have not seen it, I am begging you, please watch it and watch the Swedish version. Robert Ebert called it the best vampire movie of all times. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 98%. The American version would also get positive reviews, but nothing near what the performance or the scale of the Swedish version did. There's nothing wrong with the American version. If you're somebody who just can't watch foreign films, then go ahead and watch the American version. But if you're any kind of vampire fan, I urge you, go right now and watch the Swedish version. That's it, I'm moving on. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. I've also done an episode on this one in spring of 2023, so it's on the YouTube channel and it's on the podcast. This is a 2014 film about a lone vampire girl, her love of music and skateboarding, and then of course she finds a human and falls in love, and there's a cat. It's not super unique at all, but it is the first Persian vampire film to be in Persian language as well. It's written and directed by a woman, which I always love seeing, done in black and white, which I really, really appreciate. If you haven't seen it and you don't mind reading subtitles, go watch it. It is definitely, it's on a bunch of the lists of things you must watch. Vampire Hunter D. No, I have not done this one, and a lot of people have asked, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to everything, but you have to bear with me. It's a big list. I promise I will get to it. It is a series of Japanese illustrated novels, the first one coming out in 1983, and as of 2022, there's 40 in the series. You guys know I'm only going to be able to cover the first one, right? I can't cover 40. It has spawned manga, comics, anime, guidebooks, video games, art. It tells the story of a vampire hunter named D, hence the title. In this sort of like post-apocalyptic world, in this world, vampires are called the nobles, and they're scientifically advanced. They are the ones who actually planned this nuclear war that destroyed the earth, and then they rebuilt it in a way that benefits them as vampires. D is revealed to be a Dhampir, and that's what gives him some of the advantages over the humans in his quest to kill vampires. The creator has said that the 1958 movie Horror of Dracula like really inspired a lot of this idea. JC Vampires. So that's how it's listed. It's listed as JC Vampires. I am assuming it is referencing John Carpenter's Vampires, so that's what I'm going to talk about. If it's not, and the person who made the iceberg wants to tell me, by all means, let me know. But if you didn't make the iceberg, then you just need, we're an hour in. Just come along for the ride with me. John Carpenter's Vampires is a 1998 Western action horror with James Woods, and he's in charge of this like group of vampire hunters that are funded by the church. They fund them and train them to specifically go out and stop vampires. Yes, I did an episode on this one pretty early on, I think, if I'm remembering quickly. And the interesting twist on this one is that they trace this head vampire, the first vampire, who they call the Master, all the way back to a botched exorcism. So I thought that was an interesting way to do it. I always love interesting originations of vampires. So this one was a botched exorcism. Shout out when shout out is due. It was such an interesting way. It's not a fabulous movie, but I did think that was really interesting. And anyone who has seen the scene of the Masters coming up out of the dirt and then walking towards the camera remembers it. It was such a good shot. And that was followed by 2 direct-to-video sequels that I have not seen. Maybe someday when I'm super duper bored and I don't have anything to watch, I'll put one on. But my list of things to watch is so massive, I can't imagine wasting time on these sequels. Sorry, I'm just being honest. Monster Squad. Oh, the nostalgia. When I was a young vampire, just a wee vampire, I loved this movie. Monster Squad is a 1987 movie that was like The Goonies, but The Goonies meets Universal Monsters. It's about a group of neighborhood kids who love the Universal monsters. They have this like whole club where they meet in a clubhouse and talk about all things monster, and unwittingly they find themselves in the middle of real monsters trying to take over the world, led by none other than Dracula. Alongside of him, he has the Wolfman, the Gill-Man, the Mummy, and Dracula's 3 female companions who try to stop the children from foiling their plot. But of course, the kids win and they save the world. Dracula was played by a man named Duncan. The movie was produced like some of the most iconic one-liners of all time. It has a massive cult following, especially people my age, like people raised in the 80s who love horror. I've seen so many Monster Squad tattoos. I just was at a con not too long ago and saw a Monster Squad lunchbox, and I'm kicking myself for not buying it. Anywho, in 2010, there was talks of remakes. Thank goodness they scrapped that idea, because who would remake the Monster Squad, and why? Why would you do that? Anywho. All right, friends. That is the end of Layer 2. We've done it. We've done the first Vampire Iceberg episode. It's just over an hour. I think that's more than enough. So next week we will cover Layers 3 and 4. I hope you're enjoying this. Let me know down below what your favorite monster cereal is. Let me know down below what your favorite topic was on this iceberg, and can you please wait until the end of the entire iceberg to tell me all the things I did wrong or all the things that should be on the iceberg? I'm just asking, okay? Be nice. This was a heck of an undertaking, but I'm doing it for you guys and in honor of spooky season, so try to be nice, all right? Okay, I will be back next week. Bring your scuba gear because we're going underwater for the next layer of the iceberg. I hope you're loving October. I hope that you're having like bonfires and going, apple picking or whatever you humans do at this time of year. In the meantime, I wish you wicked hugs and bloody kisses. Good evening.